Where they at, who they be, cause they not up in the streets. The ones they used to walk in for, they sold them for phonies. Hidden in those nations, the lost they cannot see. Wake up my young lion, see the light, he set free. The truth is come knocking, heed his word, no blocking. Put away your false idols, Sunday worship and false doctrine. He's a wolf, he's a wolf. Don't listen to him, granny, eats a swine while he smiles, fill his pocket with your money. He other with his eyes, at your son, at your hubby. Kiss the ring, holy water, no I'm burning. It's the days and crusades in the name of my Jesus. Tarnish, just name the face while you worship demons. My brother, you're not religious, but you're spiritual now. Praying to whatever you think is listening now. You say you feel lovers watching over you now. Doing the hoodoo, bet your God's real proud.
So I met a guy, he had 22 bags in a pocket. They were full of money and a walkie-talkie. Took some out the bank, then he put them in his tank. Shot them up to the sky, and I think they're gonna fly. That flip like a firework, sparks gonna spit. If you get shot by lightning, who's gonna save you in the pit? Well, you know nada, I'm the rescuing you. Cause now I know that all your actions ain't true. If you wanna know Jesus, I'll preach him to you. To observe all things whatsoever he's commanded you. All about love, love, love. Jesus is always caring. Don't you ever think that's gonna happen at his second coming. Get from the devil's no altars to sacrifice on.
Hands up in the front, hands up in the back. Praising, what you praising is whack. They're like trees in the forest, dropping like bodies, flames burning, you can't stop it. Light a candle, blow it out, plant a tree, cut it down. See a statue, you bow down, painting it, hunt it down. What you doing, who you worshiping now? Cause I got that book for you, sit and knocking this out. I don't see a spirit, I don't see no heart. Yelling at your brother at every street corner shop. Where's your covering, sis? Where it at? You're winging, we gon' do it, hit the back, go again. I ain't really tripping, Lord, I ain't missed a beat. Cause there ain't nothing really out there for me in the streets. If he can joke me when you winning, he can ghost you when you slipping. How many more pieces for the Lord come knocking for real? Bring him out. Even so, come Lord, clear him out.
All right. Shalom Aleichem, Shabbat Shalom, and Happy Hanukkah. Baruch Hashem Elohim, Baruch Hashem Abayah, Baruch Hashem Adonai Yah HaMashiach, or otherwise known as praise the name or bless the name of Jesus. Praise or bless the name of Jesus Christ. Praise or bless the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Yesu Yah Masihi. Welcome to Fellowship of the First Resurrection. With us here in person in Mississippi, Shabbat Shalom, Happy Hanukkah, Shalom Aleichem. If you're watching us via live stream in Kenya at the satellite location, Shabbat Shalom, Shalom Aleichem, Happy Hanukkah to the brothers and sisters in Kenya. And if you're watching in Southern California at First Resurrection Fellowship, Southern California, Shabbat Shalom, Shalom Aleichem, Happy Hanukkah. And then for everybody else that's watching via live stream on Rumble or YouTube or the website.com, Shalom Aleichem and Happy Hanukkah to y'all. We will hopefully have Facebook back up in January, but we wanted to do a brand new Facebook too and have it tied to the actual church's website instead of our personal ones. And so in order to do that, to have that fully removed, we have to, the way Facebook is, you can't sign back in. If you sign back in that time, it'll prompt you to put that other one, the one you want to delete forever, back up. So we should have the Facebook back up because there were people in Kenya who were using the Facebook. We should have it back up. Sisters, or the women, we ask that you cover your heads. Brothers, we ask that you uncover your heads. Again, for the women, we ask that you cover your heads. For the brothers, we ask that you uncover your heads. We're going to open up with prayer, and then we're going to get started with this morning's lesson. This morning's lesson, we're going to pick up where we left off last night, dealing with Hanukkah. And we're going to wrap up the time of Antiochus Epiphanes and what happened with the Maccabees. And now we're going to look at and transition into what Hanukkah and the Feast of Dedication and the Maccabees point to prophetically for when the second coming happens, or the second advent, right? So prophetically, what the Maccabees and Hanukkah point to in the kingdom. All right, so let's all face Jerusalem. We're going to open up with prayer, and then we'll get started. All right. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this time that you've allowed us to come together as Jews and Christians on your holy Shabbat, and also during the week of Hanukkah. We thank you for the opportunity to come together and assemble. And we also thank you for the opportunity to do so with studying your word, so that we can learn more about what we need to make the kingdom. We pray, Abba Yah, that this word that goes forth, that it'll fall on fertile ground where it'll be watered and nurtured and lead to fruits of repentance and works of righteousness, so that we can make the kingdom and make the first resurrection. We also pray, El Elyon, the Most High God, that we do not add to your word and that we do not take away from your word, but that we teach your word line upon line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. And we ask that you would add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and doing of your word. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. All right. So last night we left off in Daniel 11 and verse 16. All right. Nehemiah 8 and 8, like we do at the beginning of most lessons. So they read in the book and the law of God distinctly. That's where we're at now in Daniel. Picking back up where we left off, we're in the law and the prophets. So it says here, so they read in the book and the law of God distinctly and gave this sense and caused them to understand the reading. So that's what we're going to do this morning for those of us here in the Americas, for our brothers and sisters in Kenya, for them this afternoon, this afternoon / evening, right? We're going to make sense of what Daniel is talking about in regards to Hanukkah and in regards to the end times as well. Okay. So last night we dealt with Daniel chapter 8, and also on the first day of Hanukkah we dealt with Daniel chapter 8 a little bit, but we dealt with Daniel chapter 8 more specifically last night in more detail. And so that part was Daniel prophesying about the events of Hanukkah and the Maccabees, which would take place like 400 years after Daniel's life. And then Daniel also prophesied about the Great Tribulation and the abomination of desolation, which hasn't happened yet. The abomination and Great Tribulation hasn't happened yet. And Daniel's prophesied about HaMashiach's second coming as well. And so that's the part we're going to transition into today. And the Hanukkah prophecy, and what happened with the Maccabees, that was a foreshadowing to what's going to happen when HaMashiach comes, and that's what we're going to look at today. And so again, we're dealing with the law and the prophets, and we're going to help you make sense of things. So the Maccabees are a foreshadowing to HaMashiach and his army, the saints, right, and the holy angels and the children of Israel, right, the ones who don't make the flesh and blood ones, who don't make the first resurrection, right, but they get gathered to the wilderness, the second Exodus, and then all the wicked ones are purged. It tells you this in the book of Ezekiel. All of the wicked ones are purged, are going to be purged in the wilderness, and then only the righteous ones are going to be allowed to go into the land of Israel and inherit it. Those flesh and blood, Israelites, they'll be a part of the Lord's army as well. That's what the Maccabees are symbolic for and are foreshadowing. We've already dealt with what the menorah symbolizes kind of thoroughly. The Antiochus Epiphanes and the transgression of desolation, which is what we dealt with in Daniel chapter 8. That's a foreshadowing abomination of desolation that hasn't happened yet, and that's what we're going to transition into. And then in the end, we're going to look at, and this is still staying in the law and the prophets, so the Tanakh, and helping you make sense of and causing you to understand what the law and the prophets have to say about Hanukkah, right? We're going to use the New Testament as well, right? Which we've already been doing, because we've dealt with how Jesus celebrated Hanukkah and kept Hanukkah in the New Testament, and why Jesus did that and the significance of it, right? But in the end, which on the last day of Hanukkah, we will I have to look at let me look at our schedule. Hold on. Is it the last night? Yeah, so it's the last night. So tomorrow night, if the Lord wills and provides, we will on that one, we'll look into Ezekiel, where Ezekiel prophesies. Oh, and Daniel does too. It talks about that in this one in Daniel. So in Daniel as well, Daniel and Ezekiel both mention how in the kingdom, the temple is going to be dedicated on Hanukkah. Like that temple during the 1,000-year reign that's going to be built when HaMashiach returns, what people call Ezekiel's temple, because it's thoroughly described in the book of Ezekiel. And then in other passages throughout the Tanakh, it lets you know that temple is going to be built when the resurrected saints are here, after the first resurrection, and during the beginning of HaMashiach's 1,000-year reign. Zerubbabel will be back, and he'll be overseeing it being built. And so it lets you know in Daniel and in the book of Ezekiel that temple's altar is going to be dedicated on Hanukkah, right? Same time as Hanukkah. And when they dedicate it, they're going to do a feast of dedication for 8 days, like they've done with every temple every time they've actually built the temple or had to rebuild it and rededicate it, or the first time they built it and dedicated it. Because remember with Solomon's temple, that temple, or really David's temple, but Solomon's temple, they dedicated that during Sukkot for 8 days, right? So anyways, it lets you know in Daniel and in the book of Ezekiel that's going to happen on Hanukkah. And so we're going to go over that. Maybe we'll get to that this morning. But if not, for sure, we're going to get to it tomorrow night. All right. Now, let's pick it up at Daniel 11. And we'll pick it up at verse 15. Then we'll go into verse 16. All right. So basically, you know how all of the feast days, this is a meat thing. All of that, and we go over this every year on the feast days. And so that's why even now, if you notice with Hanukkah, we're kind of going over the same concept of what we go over on all the feast days, which is basically the end times. Yeah, because I was going to say the only one where we don't as much is Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread, but we still do because the 10 plagues. And when we do the lesson, when we cover the Exodus and the actual Passover, when our ancestors, if you're Israelite or if you have any Israelite, blood or ancestry, when your ancestors left out of Africa, those 10 plagues are a foreshadowing to the Great Tribulation and the second Exodus, because there's going to be 10 plagues when you add it up with that. You have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This is review and then extra learning. But you have the 4, but this is connecting all of these feast days. But you have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And then remember the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls of wrath. Okay. That's 6 really. So that gives you 10, because the 7th one is the first resurrection. So it's like that when that last trumpet blows, that's when you have the first resurrection and the rapture. So you put the 4 together with those 6, that's 10 plagues. Same thing. And you have the 2 witnesses during the Great Tribulation, just like during the first Exodus, you had Moses and Aaron. But anyways, we go over that every year. So even during that time, we make a connection to the end times, right? Because all of these feast days point to the kingdoms. The Father's kingdom is focused. The Father's kingdom is focused on more in Feast of Dedication or Hanukkah, and in Sukkot. Okay. Because we talked a lot about the Father's kingdom when we did the lesson on Enoch and the Feast of Dedication and what it means to be dedicated, right? And making it to the 8th day, and why we have the 8 candles, and the Father being the Father of lights. But so with Hanukkah and Sukkot, same thing with Sukkot, because you have that 8th day assembly, right? Those ones connect to the Father's kingdom. Most of the other ones connect to HaMashiach's kingdom, right? So same thing. Even when you look at Purim, the children of Israel getting delivered again out of the hands of utter extinction, right? Foreshadowing to the kingdom, foreshadowing the HaMashiach's kingdom. Okay, Hanukkah, without Hanukkah, you're not going to get the full picture you're not going to get the full prophetic picture with the feast days that helps you understand everything in Bible prophecy. Because the feast days, if you want to understand everything in Bible prophecy, you have to understand the deeper meaning behind all these feast days. So if you don't incorporate Hanukkah, you're not going to understand what it means. We're going to read it later. And here, when we go into Daniel chapter 12 later, and it starts talking about these days after the end of the Great Tribulation, right? So, and but we're going to go into the scriptures and break it down. But if you don't incorporate Hanukkah into that, then you're not going to understand the full picture and the full plan. All right. Now, let's pick it up here, Daniel 11 and verse 15. So it says here, so the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, that's talking about Israel and Palestine, in portions of Lebanon, which by his hand shall be consumed. Now here in the sections, in the section of verses 16 through 28, this is now dealing with the fall of the Seleucid dynasty, right? And what happened when the Maccabees kicked out Antiochus and the Greeks, right? And reestablished Israel as its own state for a period of time. And during that time, that's when they converted the Edomites, right? The Edomites that were around them, they went and forcibly converted them to the religion and circumcised them and incorporated them into the people. That's why today you don't find anybody around really calling themselves Edomites, right? You have a few tribes in Africa who still retain the name, right? But most of them have just been incorporated into the Jews, right? The ones that have, a lot of the ones that are in Africa are one that still retain the name, are ones that came before they were converted by the Maccabees, and they've been in Africa since before those times. Just like there's Jews that have been there before those times as well, right? Living in that area. So that's why those ones like in Nigeria, like the Edo, the Idoma, and others, they've retained their name and identity, right? Whereas the other ones, they've got the ones that got converted by the Maccabees, they just became Jews. And then wherever they spread out into in the world, they just kept the identity of Jews. Those ones primarily went throughout Northern Africa, the Middle East, like Turkey, and Southern Europe, like the Mediterranean, basically the Mediterranean world, right? That's basically where they spread out to. And then portions of the like Middle East and going over towards like Persia, right? So anyways, now that's just extra learning on your way to learning. So this is during that time, and I have here in the notes the fall of the Seleucid dynasty, Antiochus, right? And of Antiochus. And when we get towards the end of this section of verses 16 through 28, now it starts dealing with the rise of the last of the Gentile dynasties, which is Rome, which is the ones we're still under now, right? Now, let's pick it back up at verse 17. It says here, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. Right? So I have here in verse 17 for the notes, Antiochus III gave his daughter Cleopatra in marriage to Ptolemy V, right? Which we had talked about that last night as well too. All right, let's pick it back up here at verse 18. After this shall he turn his face onto the isles, and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. The isles here are talking about the coastlands on the shores of the Aegean Sea, right? The coastlands on the shores of the Aegean Sea, right? which were a part of Greece at the time. Yeah. Now, let's pick it back up here at verse 19. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Right? Now, hold on, let me see. All right, let's pick it back up here at verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yea, also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. Verse 24. He shall enter peaceably, even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, and spoil and riches. Yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. All right. Now, I'm going to go back up here in the notes. So, and I have mentioned some of this stuff. I have mentioned some of this stuff already. Last night. But let's finish it out down to verse 28. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. All right, so now let's go back up to verse 18. All right, so it says here, after this shall he turn his face onto the isles. That's talking about the coastlands of the Aegean Sea, and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. All right, this prince on his own behalf is talking about the Roman general Scipio. All right, and this is not Scipio Africanus. This is not talking about Scipio Africanus, the Roman general who defeated the Carthaginian leader Hannibal in 202 BC. But this is Lucius Cornelius, right? Who became Lucius Cornelius Scipio, who became Scipio Asiaticus, right? For his exploits in like Turkey and Asia Minor, like what's today modern day Turkey, and even going to areas like where the Aegean Sea is. All right, he was the brother of Scipio Africanus. Both of them got those titles for Africanus and Asiaticus for their exploits in those lands. All right. Asia goes back to an ancient name that the Hittites had for that area, and Africa goes back to the Hebrew name of Abraham's grandson, Ephor or Afri. All right, now Abraham's grandson that he had with Keturah from Midian. That's where the name Africa comes from, right? Because some of Midian's descendants were settled in Arabia, right, in like southern Iraq, and in other portions and going towards Jordan, and in other portions of Midian, of the Midianites were, their offspring and clans. It tells you were placed in the Bible, and like Josephus talks about this, where the others were placed in the Horn of Africa, so Eastern Africa, and then the others were placed, another branch was placed in Northwest Africa. All right. Now, this is just extra learning on top of what we're covering here. All right. I have there in the notes. So the Asia is a Hittite word coming from their region, Asuwa, and from the Akkadian root Asu, meaning rising sun. How the sun rises in the east. All right. Now, let's pick it back up here at verse 19. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes and the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. All right. This is talking about Antiochus III, right, who was succeeded by Seleucus IV Philopator, who sent his chief minister to take charge of the temple treasures in Jerusalem. That chief minister, Heliodorus, murdered Seleucus IV and tried to usurp the kingdom, but he was dispossessed by Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the brother of Seleucus. All right, let's pick it back up here at verse 21. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, that's Antiochus Epiphanes, all right, the main villain in the story of Hanukkah, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yea, also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made, right, this prince of the covenant is referring to the high priest Onias IV, right? This prince of the covenant is referring to high priest Onias IV. Excuse me. All right, so it says here, and with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yea, also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. All right, so this is talking here about the prince of the covenant, who was at the time was the high priest Onias IV, who was deposed by Antiochus in favor of Onias's brother Jason. Jason is the one who helped them. Remember how we read in Daniel 8 and in other places, and in the story of the account in the Maccabees, of how many of the Israelites, many of the Jews became Hellenized and started worshiping the Greek gods and practicing the Greek customs. It was Jason who helped and assisted Antiochus in doing that. All right. So this is talking about during that time. All right. Jason replaced Onias, right, who became a full-fledged ally, talking about Jason, of the corrupt Antiochus. During the high priesthood of his father, Onias III, early branches of the Bakongo people left Israel for Africa. And I have here in the notes to see the Bakongo history lesson, but that all the history lessons have been taken down. If you need reference for that, as in video, we can contact the church. We can see how we can figure that out. And if you need the notes, we can try to send you the notes with the PDF, but it's better to have the video But anyways, so you have to contact the church for those the history lessons. All right. But anyways, so this is taught during this time, Onias. This is what I was talking about the other day, about when Onias went to so it wasn't. That's why I said I didn't remember if it was Alexandria or if it was Central Egypt. But anyways, Onias built a temple during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes to while the temple in Jerusalem was desecrated. Right, hold on. Oh yeah, so good. It wasn't Alexandria. Great. That's actually better, because then it makes it even more in Africa. All right. It's not really Central Africa. It's like the Delta part of Egypt, still in Lower Egypt, so northern, but not on the coast. All right. More like in the central part of northern Egypt. So let's pull up. This is what it's referring to in verses 22 and 23 with the Prince of the Covenant. That's Onias the fourth, who was high priest, who was deposed by Antiochus Epiphanes, right? During the time that the prophecy of Daniel is being fulfilled about the 2,300 evening and morning sacrifices that we talked about last night, the 1,500 days, right? That you have the evening, morning sacrifices taken away. So during that time, Onias was removed and his brother Jason was put in power, who was more favorable towards the Hellenistic agenda. And so during that time, Onias IV fled into Africa and built a temple there. Okay, so we're going to look at that. That's what it's referring to here in Daniel chapter 11, verses 22 through 23. Okay, because this was also going on in Africa during the time of the Hanukkah story, right? Now, hold on. All right. So this is a Jewish encyclopedia, Leontopolis, meaning Lion City, place in the nome of Heliopolis, Egypt, situated 180 stadia from Memphis, famous as containing a Jewish sanctuary, right, temple, the only one outside of Jerusalem where sacrifices were offered, outside from a somewhat uncertain allusion of the Hellenist Artaponus, Eusebius, Protabia Evangelica. Only Josephus gives information of this temple. All right, there. And this other one is the Elephantine one. All right, which more information about the Elephantine one came out after this Jewish encyclopedia was completed. But that Elephantine one, that one was built during the time when, same thing, when the Chaldeans destroyed Solomon's temple, right? And while they were waiting for the second temple to be rebuilt, which, remember, that time it had to stay. So during this time of Hanukkah, it stayed desolate only for 3 years, right? And 10 days. And it ended up being 1,500 because you had 2 leap month years. The first year and the third year were leap month years. And so you end up with 3 years and 10 days, that being 1,500 days. We went over that last night. All right. But when the Chaldeans destroyed Solomon's temple, it lay desolate for over 70 years, right? Before they rebuilt, some of the Jews went back and rebuilt it, right? So during that time, because most of the actual ethnic Jews, you know, by blood, if they have an opportunity to flee somewhere on their own, or they go back to Africa because that's where they originated. All right. And so even going back to before the Tower of Babel with Ham and Shem's descendants, so that's normally where they choose to go. So they built a temple in Africa during that time, and we talked about that last night. And that was in southern Egypt on the border with Sudan, right? So northern Africa / Eastern Africa, because Sudan is like a Eastern African country. Okay, so you had the same thing during that time. All right, now, so it says here, Josephus talked about this temple as well. I'm not interested in the Talmudic stuff. The establishment of a central sanctuary in Egypt, it says here, was not due to the disorders that arose in Palestine under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, to the desecration of the sanctuary at Jerusalem, to the supplanting of the legitimate family of priests by the installation of alchemists, nor to the personal ambition of Onias IV, but to the vast extent of the Jewish diaspora in Egypt itself. So it happened during this time, right? During the time of Antiochus Epiphanes and all of this stuff. All of this stuff that they just mentioned here is valid, but they're saying here that it would have been done. It's something basically that owes itself to the fact that there were so many Jews and Israelites living in Egypt during that time. And most of those were the ones who didn't want to be, the ones who went into Africa didn't want to be Hellenized, right? And so this wouldn't have just been for the and again, where this temple was, this one is more, it's located in the northern half of Egypt, right? But it would have been a good location for also the Jews coming from the Maariv, right? So Northwest Africa, like the modern day countries of Libya, Algeria, Mauritania, Morocco, Tunisia, Chad, Niger, and then also Israelites, Jews coming from Sudan, Kenya, Ethiopia, Eastern Africa, okay, because this is where the majority of the Jews and Israelites were at that time anyway, right? So that's basically what this is. That's basically what that's talking about. All right. So it would appear from the account of Josephus in the Jewish Wars, and more specifically from the fact that Onias is called in the same work, the son of Simon, that the temple of Leontopolis was built by Onias III, who drove the sons of Tobias from Jerusalem and who fled to Egypt, Syria's ancient rival, when Antiochus IV attacked that city. But this account is contradicted by the story that Onias was murdered at Antioch in 170. That's in Syria. That Antioch is a town on the border of Turkey and Syria. The modern day countries of Turkey and Syria. Right, that's where it was located. It says here, but this account is contradicted by the story that Onias III was murdered at Antioch in 171 BC in the second book of Maccabees, chapter 4, verse 33. Josephus's account in the Antiquities is therefore more probable, namely that the builder of the temple was a son of the murdered Onias III, and that a mere youth at the time of his father's death, he had fled to the court of Alexandria in the consequence of the Syrian persecutions, perhaps because he thought that salvation would come to his people from Egypt. And they reference Josephus there. So they're saying here that it's referring to Onias the fourth. Ptolemy, this is the Jewish encyclopedia. So they're just giving you all the, proving all things, giving you all the different possibilities. But they're telling you here that the most probable is that it is referring to Onias the fourth. All right, Ptolemy the sixth Philometor was king of Egypt at that time. He probably had not yet given up his claims to coalesce Syria and Judea, and gladly gave refuge to such a prominent personage of the neighboring country. Onias now requested the king and his sister and wife Cleopatra to allow him to build a sanctuary in Egypt, similar to the one at Jerusalem, where he would employ Levites and priests of his own race. And he referred to the prediction of the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 19, verse 19, that a Jewish temple would be erected in Egypt, right? And that prophecy is referring to this. It was also referring to Elephantine, this temple, and then it'll ultimately be fulfilled in the kingdom, because that's a foreshadowing. That prophecy is a foreshadowing to all of these things are a foreshadowing to what's going to happen in the kingdom, right? Because it tells you that Egypt and Assyria will be a third. Each of them will be a third with the Israelites during HaMashiach's 1,000-year reign, right? And it calls all three of them, his people and his heritage. Excuse me. All right. But if we have time in tomorrow's lesson, we don't have to skip any scriptures in tomorrow's night's lesson. We should get to Isaiah 19. All right. Josephus then quotes two documents, Onias' letter to the royal couple and the king's answer to Onias. Both of these, however, appear spurious on the following grounds. Onias refers in his letter to his military exploits in Colia, Syria, and Phoenicia. And I only want to get what's most important. I'm not going to read the Talmud part, but we'll read this part. All right. Onias' temple was not exactly similar to the temple at Jerusalem, being more in the form of a high tower. And as regards the interior arrangement, it had not a candelabrum, but a hanging lamp. The building had not a menorah, but a hanging lamp. The building had a court which was surrounded by a brick wall with stone gates. The king endowed the temple with large revenues, a fact that may have suggested to the writer of the letters mentioned above the wealth of wood and sacrificial animals. The reputation which the temple of Onias enjoyed is indicated by the fact that the Septuagint changes the phrase city of destruction in Isaiah 19 and verse 18 to city of righteousness. It may be taken for granted that the Egyptian Jews sacrificed frequently in the temple of Leontopolis, although at the same time they fulfilled their duty toward the temple at Jerusalem, as Philo narrates that he himself did. All right. According to Josephus, the temple of Leontopolis existed for 340 years. 343 years, right? So it lasted beyond the temple in Jerusalem that was destroyed in 70 AD, okay? And remember, they still kept trying to do things in Jerusalem all the way up to the Bar Kokhba revolt, right? All right, so this is like all the way up to 200 AD. right? You still had this this temple up. So it ends up getting seized. You can guess by who, the Romans, right? But it doesn't get seized till later. Yeah. All right. So this temple in Africa went on even beyond the temple in that was destroyed in 70 AD. All right. Now, and this is all connected to Hanukkah, Feast of Dedication, because this temple that was in Egypt was set up during that time, right? And as we're reading here, it lasted all the way up until the 3rd century AD, the early 200s. All right, so according to Josephus, the temple of Leontopolis existed for 343 years. I don't know, though, if it came in at that time and he was alive. I don't know. I don't even know how he could know it would be 343 years. That would be going beyond his time. All right. According to Josephus, the temple of Leontopolis existed for 343 years, though the general opinion is that this number must be changed to 243. It was closed either by the governor of Egypt, Lupus, or by his successor, Paulinius, about 3 years after the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem. All right, so that's why subtracting 100 years, and I'm like, yeah, that. All right. Anyways, all right, so that makes sense. So that must be a clerical or typical error by Josephus. All right. So it says here, Paulinius, about 3 years after the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem, and the sacrificial gifts, or rather the interior furnishings, were confiscated for the treasury of Vespasian. All right, so the Egyptian one was destroyed 3 years after the one in Jerusalem. So this one lasted to 73 AD. All right, now, so a little over 200 years. The emperor, fearing that through this temple, Egypt might become a new center for Jewish rebellion. No ruins have so far been discovered of this temple, once so famous. Perhaps the present Tel Yehuda marks its site. They've probably already found stuff for this temple. This Jewish encyclopedia is old. It's like from the 1900s. All right, let's go back to our notes. All right. Now, let's pick it back up here at verse 24. So we still got North Africa and East Africa involved in the story here. All right, let's pick it back up here at verse 24. He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. All right, talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, but it's not going to last. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches. Yea, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. Right, that's that 1,500 days. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper. For yet the end shall be at the time appointed. All right, now we're going into the time of the Romans. All right, now it's talking about, and the time of the end shall be at the time appointed. All right, verse 28. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits, and return to his own land. And at the time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. All right. So now here in verses 29 through 45, we're dealing now with the rise of the Roman Empire, right? And the abomination of desolation, the 3.5-year great tribulation is going to get to that point, right? But this first part is dealing with the rise of the Roman Empire, right? And verse 28 was dealing with that transition from the time of Antiochus to now the rise of the Roman Empire, right, taking over. Now, let's pick it back up here, and I'll give you for reference. Give me just a moment. All right. So for a reference point, the Maccabees were able to rule in Judea roughly for 100 years, but after about roughly 100 years, the Romans took over, and when the Romans took over, they put in power over them the Edomites that they had converted, and made them the rulers in Judea, and that's when you get the Herodian dynasty, right? So that took place during this transition period and time here in verse 28. All right, now going into verse 29, we're dealing with the Roman Empire, right? Verse 29 here. So in these verses, we're going to see the rise of the Roman Empire, right? The abomination of desolation, which is going to happen at the end of days, right? So that hasn't happened yet. The abomination of desolation is what starts the 3.5-year process to the end of Rome in the West and the time of the Gentiles. That's funny because it's basically a 3.5-year siege. And they're not going to even realize it, especially when the angels are up there in the sky. You would think when the carcass, like when the eagles are circling around and the vultures, you should know that the carcass is there, right? But the people don't know the signs of the times. So anyways, that's going to be in this passage here, our section from verses 29 to 45 is going to cover the start of the Roman Empire and the end of the Roman Empire. The end of the Roman Empire is going to begin with the abomination of desolation, right? We're talking about the ultimate end of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire it still exists today. It's the European Union. The Roman Empire has revived itself many times, right? Coming back as the Holy Roman Empire, which existed all the way up until the early 1900s. Essentially, because you still had kings in Europe who were calling themselves princes and holy electors of the Holy Roman Empire, right? This is all under the papacy, okay? All right. Also, it's going to go into the beast and false prophet, right? So the beast is going to be the last leader of the last political leader of the Roman Empire. The false prophet is going to be the final pope, right? The final pope. That's the false prophet. Okay. And so the final leader of the European Union, because that's the Bible tells you that there's going to be 10 revivings of the Roman Empire. We're under the 10th reviving of the Roman Empire now, which is the European Union. So it's going to be the final leader of the European Union, who's the beast, right? And the false prophet is going to be their last religious leader, so the last pope. During this time, you have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right, which are a part of those 7 seals, followed by the 7 trumpets or the 7 bowls of wrath. Right now, let's pick it back up here at verse 29, right? Verse 29. But I also, I mentioned this last night, so I found out now as well that, so you know how my African ancestors, they did not, their religion was Judeo-Christianity, basically the same thing the same thing we're practicing now, and they rejected all of the Roman stuff. You know, we've done those history lessons aren't up anymore. You have to contact the church to try to get those videos, but or the notes. But that was their religion before they were brought over here as, you know, slaves and indentured servants, so free persons and slaves. Their religion was Judeo-Christian, and they rejected the Roman Catholicism, right? And then I learned that my Scottish ancestors did the same thing. Excuse me. So they also believed with those Covenanter Scottish, part of their covenant that they signed said that the Pope is the Antichrist, right? That the papacy is the office of the Antichrist, and that the last Pope is going to be the Antichrist. So that's something my ancestors have always believed. And one of my ancestors in Mississippi from the African side, in his slave narrative, it's my great great grandma's brother's slave narrative. So my great uncle, and both of them did. My great grandma did a slave narrative too, but my great uncle, he was a preacher, and in his slave narrative, he told the people from the WPA, you know, right now is the time of the Gentiles, but he was like, soon the time of the Gentiles is going to be over, and then it's going to be time for the Jew to reign on the earth. And so this is in my blood. It's not anything. It's not anything new. You have to, you know, go and pull the records of your own. Go and pull the records of your own history. You might be surprised. All right. You might be pleasantly surprised, especially if you're so this is just on a side note, learning on your way to learning. I make the joke like I'm a Mississippi mutt, right? So if you're a child of the New World, you might want to look into that, because there's a high probability that's the case. That's the reason why I'm saying it's a high probability. Why do you think your ancestors got sent over here in the first place? Talking about the ones, if you're mixed, are the European ones that came over here. So like if you're mixed with that, a lot of those European ones, and if you're not mixed, like if you're just, you know, like Afro-Latino, or like just, you know, Afro-Caribbean, you know, pure that, then you're already probably Israelite, and your religion was probably Judeo-Christian before you came over here. Not many Muslims were sent over here. Muslims didn't capture other Muslims, and it was forbidden to trade Muslims as slaves. So, and the few Muslims that did get sent over here, a lot of them ended up getting sent back because they knew Arabic and could, you know, communicate back to their own kingdom. And if they didn't choose to go back, they stayed here and owned slaves themselves. Like, so in South Carolina, you have Fulani who did that, who were Muslim, and they didn't go back to Africa. They stayed in South Carolina and decided to own slaves. So anyways, I digress, but I don't digress. But anyways, so if you're, for the ones though that are like mixed or like Creole, so, and when I say Creole, I mean the general definition, not just the Louisiana one. Like, meaning if you're from the New World, like the Latin America and the Caribbean and like America, even Canada, because in Canada they have the Métis. So those are the people where, you know, you're mixed with the, you have some connection to a colonial ancestor from colonial times who came from Europe, from one of the, you know, from the original, whoever colonized you, from that original colony. And then you may be mixed with the Native American and wherever you're at, and the African, right, as well, that was brought over there. A lot of the Europeans that were sent over here, just like I found out about my Scottish ancestors, a lot of them were sent over here in because they refused to be Catholic. Okay, so like with the Spanish and the Portuguese, so like the Portuguese in Brazil, and it wasn't, you had the Portuguese in other parts too, besides just Brazil. Like they were in Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago and places for a little bit. But point is Portuguese and the Spaniards, a lot of those were Moors and Sephardic Jews who decided to just claim, instead of fleeing into Africa, like in the Northern Africa and going into Western Africa, they were like, oh, we'll just claim we're Catholic and go to the New World and practice our religion in secret. And over time, they ended up just becoming a part of the regular, they ended up losing that and becoming Catholic. So you have a lot of that, even with the French, like here in North America, a lot of that is French Huguenot. It's not actually French Catholic, it's French Huguenot. And I'll stop there. But if you look into that, there's a lot of that in the story of the people who got sent here. Because if you were sent here as a political prisoner, or if you left on your own free will, most of the people who were trying to do that were looking for religious freedom. You know, you're volunteering to go to a brand new place, you know, surrounded by what you have been told is savages, right? The Native Americans. Who in their right mind is going to want to go, is going to volunteer for that, right? And you're not even going with a military. So a lot of the ones who volunteered were trying to escape religious persecution, which is from the Roman Catholics, even if it was a territory like in, you know, like Puerto Rico or Cuba, even though in theory that's under Roman Catholic dominion, you're now thousands upon thousands of miles away from the Vatican, thousands upon thousands of miles away from Spain on this island, right? That is basically now vast and ran by y'all, and the ships coming from Spain are only coming at certain parts of the year. You're kind of left there now to your own devices for a while, right? Now, then over time though, as the island gets developed, and the same thing in Central America and other places, and it's not just with the Spanish, you do this with the British, the Portuguese, etc. Once they find something viable to exploit the land and it becomes productive, like they bring in slaves or whatever the case may be, right? Now that's when those people who were crypto Jews, crypto Muslims, or whatever, now a lot of them just become nominally actual Roman Catholics, because the colony now is being more administered by the mother country, and the mother country is there with more activity, right? Which eventually, over the course of time, this is just learning on your way to learning history, which eventually over the course of time leads to grievances with the people, with the generations of people who have been born there and living there, and you end up with a revolution. So like here in America, the Revolutionary War, Haiti, the Haitian Revolution with Toussaint Louverture. In South America, you have the Bolivarian revolutions with Simon Bolivar. And so that's kind of here the history of the New World, the history of the New World, right? But I just want to tie it into just tying in the connection of the Roman Empire still exists. And you might want to, for those of us here in the New World, if you actually probably, unless you come from royal blood, and I'm pretty sure none of you do, not like that type. I'm not talking about like some Irish clan chief or nothing like that. I'm talking about like the Habsburgs, the Stuarts, the House of Orange and things like that. All right. Like, unless you come, we're talking about that type of stuff. Unless you come from that type of blood, right, then it's a high probability your ancestry, right, if it's connected to a Creole European person, in any type of way or mixture, is a high probability that they came over here trying to escape persecution from the Roman Empire's religion, right? The Roman Catholics. All right, now let's pick it back up here, verse 29. At the time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Shittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation. The ships of Shittim, that's the west, right? The islands in the Mediterranean, of which Italy is a peninsula or coastland, which is the same word that's used for isles in the Tanakh. It includes peninsulas. And then Italy also includes islands in the Mediterranean, like Sicily, Sardinia, etc. For the ships of Shittim shall come against him, right? And this is now the reason the Romans are able to do this and now start establishing their power, is because the Romans are now done. They had defeated the Punic peoples, right? The Carthaginians, right? Hamilcar and Hannibal in the Western Mediterranean. And now, since they had defeated them in the Western Mediterranean, now they can focus in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Levant. And now the Romans have taken over those islands in the Mediterranean. Because prior to this, those islands in the Mediterranean were controlled by Punic peoples. All right. So like what's that? It's not Cyprus. Anyways, those islands in, like I just mentioned, Sicily, Sardinia, originally Punic peoples were living there. Coastal Spain and Portugal. This is where you get the name Hispania from, right? Where you get Hispanic from. That's actually a Hebrew word and a Canaanite word. So it's a Hebrew and Phoenician word. This is learning on your way to learning. One of the oldest cities in the world is Cadiz, right? And that's like one of the oldest cities on the Iberian Peninsula. That was founded by Punic peoples, Phoenicians, and Hebrews, right? Even the name Barcelona goes back to what we're talking about here with the Barcas, right? And the Barcas were actual, Punic, mixed Israelite and Phoenician mixture. What type of Hebrew was the Barca dynasty in Carthage. It was Israelite, right? And it was also mixed with Canaanite, like most Israelites, right? That's why Hannibal's name was Hannibal, right? Because it was in reference to the god Baal, right? This is just extra learning, okay? Now, when we get the rise of the Roman Empire, the Romans took over those islands, okay? And those islands in the Mediterranean were going to remain, and the Iberian Peninsula in southern Europe were going to remain. So like the Iberian Peninsula, southern France, the southern tips of Italy, the islands in the Mediterranean, those were all going to, in northern coastal North Africa, going all the way over to like the Atlas Mountains and the start of the Sahara Desert. That was all going to be colonized and taken over by the Romans. The Romans would temporarily lose that, and it would be taken over again, right, by the same peoples, right, a mixture of Hebrews, okay, and the leftover descendants of those Canaanites and stuff that were there. And so in this case, the Berbers and primarily Arabs, in this case for the Hebrews, this is during the time of the Moors, right? But you also have Sephardic Jews there as well. A lot of the Sephardic Jews are the ones that come from those Edomites that were converted, who went instead into Southern Europe and started intermingling with those people. Then you have, and again, this is just extra learning on your way to learning. And then you had you also had actual Israelites coming from sub-Saharan Africa as well, and just from still that were up there in northern Africa, not just sub-Saharan Africa, but just already up there still in northern Africa. Them getting, because you still, just for reference, you still had stories of Bantu peoples and people that are in West Africa now, where their story doesn't have them migrating out of Egypt, like out of southern Egypt, until like the 1500s to 1600s AD. So like the last 400 years. So just for reference. So anyways, you had also, the Negro Israelites amongst the Moors as well during that time. And so for a few hundred years, they basically reclaimed that area again. That's when the Roman Empire was during the Dark Ages, right? And ended up having to have their deadly wound healed. And that process was started. This is, again, just extra learning, but that was started with the reviving that came with the Holy Roman Empire, which eventually led into the Renaissance, the rebirth, right, of the Roman Empire. But anyways, now let's pick it back up here at verse and then they would end up taking those places back. All right, let's pick it back up here at verse 30. For the ships of Shittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. And arms shall stand upon his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. All right. And remember, this is the same thing that Jesus and Paul talk about in the New Testament, this abomination of desolation that hasn't happened yet, that's going to lead to the start of the Great Tribulation, right? Because it tells you in the Bible, the abomination of desolation is what starts the 3.5-year tribulation, okay? There's not a 7-year tribulation. It's not a 7-year peace that's broken in the middle. None of that's in the Bible. That's a misinterpretation of Scripture. All right. The Bible deals with a 3.5-year great tribulation, and it tells you that's going to start when the abomination of desolation happens. All right. The Bible tells you no man, no angel, not even HaMashiach knows the day or hour when the abomination of desolation is going to happen. Only the Father. Someone's asked the question before, well, if Christ is God too, then how come he doesn't know? Right? When you're running a plan, right? Sometimes in order for a plan to work and for it not to be messed up, not everybody needs to know all the full details of the plan in order for it to work, right? You have to remember that's extra learning. HaMashiach is the one who had to come down here in a flesh and blood body and actually be tempted by Satan, right? What if Jesus came down here and when he was in the flesh, if he botched the mission? Who knows? And gave up the information. All right. So sometimes when you're running an operation, the people who are running it at the top may have it where one person doesn't know one thing that the other person knows, and it's for the sake of the operation. But anyways, I digress, but I don't digress. A lot of stuff with this, with the Elohim and with this religion is war related, all right? Because it really is a war. It really is a war religion. All right. Notice here in verse 31, an arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. Okay. Now we're going into the start of the Great Tribulation, which is at the end of the Roman Empire's time. All right, which hasn't happened yet. Okay. All right, that's coming right before HaMashiach's return. Right. So we're approaching these times, maybe in our generation or in the next, 2, 3, 4 generations, but soon, right? I would say within the next, sometime for sure, within the next 500 years, for sure. All right. So notice here, though, with the abomination of desolation, it says he's going to pollute the sanctuary of strength. All right. That's not the actual temple location. The sanctuary of strength was located in the outer court in the Hebrew, and in the Aramaic here in Daniel chapter 11 was translated as sanctuary of strength. That was talking about the temple fortress, right? The temple strong tower, right? That was there to guard the temple. So that's the location of where this abomination of desolation is going to actually take place. Okay. And then the reason why I'm bringing this up is this is why you have to do line upon line upon line, here a little, there a little. It tells you that in the book of Isaiah, right, with the prophet Isaiah, that's how you learn doctrine, right? And it's set up that way, like where the simple are going to end up stumbling, right? Even though it's that simple. You got to do here a little, there a little, right? So when we go into the book of Revelation, because John has a vision about the Great Tribulation as well, just like Joel does, just like Zechariah does, just like Daniel does. They all had visions about the Great Tribulation and HaMashiach's second advent and the establishment of the sabbatical kingdom, right? Or HaMashiach's kingdom. The Daniel also, in the book of Daniel, prophesies about the first advent as well. Yeah. He also prophesies about HaMashiach's first advent. Now, so this sanctuary of strength was located in the outer court. When the Great Tribulation starts with the abomination of desolation, it's going to be in a false temple. And the reason we're calling it a false temple is it's not Ezekiel's temple. And it's not going to actually be located where on the top of Mount Zion, where the Holy of Holies was. Where the Holy of Holies is where the Dome of the Rock Mosque is. Okay. The Arabs descend from Abraham. They descend from Ishmael. In the book of Revelations, it tells you, and it also mentions this same thing in the book of Ezekiel when he has to measure, the outer court is going to be left out for the Gentiles to trample underfoot for 1,260 days. Okay, so 1,260 days, 3.5 years. Okay, 1,000. And if I kept saying, I don't know if I keep thinking in my mind, the evening and morning sacrifices are 1,150 days. I don't know if I said 1,500, but if I did, I mean 1,150. Not 1,500, because it's 1,150 is how you end up with 2,300. All right. But anyways, there's a lot of numbers and math and stuff we're dealing with in this lesson. So if I get confused, sorry. But anyways, so 1,260 days, it tells you, right, or 3.5 years. The Gentiles are, once that abomination of desolation happens, that's where the Gentiles are going to trample underfoot. Okay, that's where it says here, the sanctuary of strength, right, which is the temple fortress. Okay, that's where they're going to build this. That's where they're going to build this false temple, and they are the Edomites and the Ashkenazis, right? So the Edomites, the Sephardic Jews that are there in Israel, and the Ashkenazis, which are in the Tanakh, are prophesied as the Gentiles, right? So the Japhetic peoples, that's where Ashkenaz comes from Japheth. The Japhetic peoples that have converted and taken the name of Israel upon themselves, them in conjunction with the Edomites, they're going to, and this is prophesied in the book of Amos and in other Obadiah, we're going to get into it. They're going to build this false third temple. At the end of the day, no harm, no foul, because if they're real Jews, and you have real Jews amongst all of them, even amongst the Ashkenazis, the remnant amongst the Ashkenazis from the original ones who converted them into the truth are the Crimean, the Crimean Karaites, right? Those are the ones from amongst them that are the remnant of the original ones, right, from when they got converted. They just keep the Torah, the laws, judgments, statutes, and commandments. They don't deal with the Talmud. But anyways, this is just extra learning on your way to learning. Real Jews, the real Jews all know, and even if you're not 100% real, if you're 90 to 99% in the knowledge, then we all know that we're reading about the prophecy. That temple's got to be built so that we can hurry up and get HaMashiach here. No man knows the day or the hour, but one thing we know for sure, before it can happen, that temple's got to be built, right? And it's not the real one, okay? All right. The Arabs are not Gentiles. They're Hebrews. They descend from Abraham. So they're not Gentiles. They don't descend from Japheth. And just even by the most narrowest definition, they're not Gentiles because they're Arabs, right? They descend from Abraham through Ishmael. That's who administers and has control over the Dome of the Rock, where the actual Holy of Holies is. So it's not going to be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles. It's still going to need to be rededicated. That whole area is going to need to be rededicated. One, because it was under the false religion of Islam for so long there. But then also, two, it's been destroyed many times. A lot of blood has been shed there over the years, and by the time of the end of the Great Tribulation and the Battle of Armageddon, all of Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. So the area is going to need to be cleansed, and it's going to need to be rededicated. And that's where, in tomorrow's lesson, hopefully, if we get to the end, that is during Hanukkah, right? After HaMashiach returns, after his second advent, is during Hanukkah that we're going to have the temple altar being rededicated and the sacrifices started. And it tells you in the book of Ezekiel, and in the book of Daniel, it's a big deal. because it's not until that happens, it's not until that Hanukkah and that Feast of Dedication, right, that the people will start being accepted, like the flesh and blood human beings that are on the earth during that time. Because remember, Hamashiach is going to restart the Levitical priesthood and restart the sacrificial law, the sacrifices again. All right, now let's pick it up. Let's pick it back up here at verse 31. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice. And they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Right? And this is going to happen throughout the time of the Roman Empire and its many revivings. They always go after people who are in the truth. Even when the Portuguese and others first started coming to East Africa, one of the first things they wanted to start making them do, and even in India with the Malabars, right, with the Malabar Jews and the Malabar Christians, because they all kept the Sabbath. That's one of the first things they wanted to make them do. You got to stop keeping the Sabbath, stop circumcising, and, you can eat pork and all this stuff, stop doing the Jewish stuff. But they fought the Portuguese, right, and resisted the Portuguese on that. All right, now, the Malabaran church, the Malabaran Jews, the Ethiopian Jews, the Ethiopian Tewahedo church, that East African Judeo-Christianity, when the Portuguese came there, they fought them on that. All right, now, and even later, going up into the 1900s, the Italians. All right, now, so like literal Rome and the Vatican. All right, let's pick it back up here at verse. But this leads into the worst of those times, which is going to be during the Great Tribulation, right? Because there's going to be so much knowledge during that time that this is all going to be happening literally globally. It's not going to be a movement here like in Northern Africa or just a movement here in Europe at a time or whatever. It's going to be globally, right? Because people are going to see what's going on. And these people who are going to do these exploits, right, but then are in the end, though, they're going to be killed. These are the ones during the tribulation who don't make it to the wilderness, right? Those Jews and Israelites and those believers who don't make it to the wilderness during the Great Tribulation, they're going to not take the mark of the beast. And so they're going to end up being hunted by Babylon, right? Babylon being the West, the Roman Empire. All right, now, which in this case is the European Union and her allies. So the European Union, and NATO. All right, now, and anybody who buys into her way of life, right, and her religion, which glorifies material things, which glorifies the disruption of genders, which glorifies the woman being in charge and the man not being in charge, what glorifies and when I'm saying materialism, basically covetousness, and which also just glorifies secularism. Okay, that whole concept. Okay, that whole thing. All right, all of the nations that are aligned with that. Okay, that's the Roman Empire, right? And during that time, okay, the Roman Empire and her allies, during the time of the Great Tribulation, they're going to be hunting down whoever hasn't taken the mark of the beast. Okay, and these people are during the Great Tribulation are going to be preaching and trying to get people not to go right along with that Babylonian system, that Roman system during the Great Tribulation. similar to how the Maccabees were turning the people during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And during that time, they were risking their lives, right? That's why it was a prototype and a foreshadowing. All right, now let's pick it back up here at verse 36. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper until the indignation be accomplished. So this is talking about the office of the papacy, and his indignation is going to be accomplished till the time is finished, and that time will be finished at the end of the Great Tribulation. And we know this is talking about the papacy because it says he exalts himself above the name of every god, right? And the God of gods. And Antiochus Epiphanes did the same thing, right? But again, and he was a prototype to this, okay? So the papacy, like just for example, with the title it has Vicar of Christ, which is a blasphemous title, right? Vicar of Christ means I'm Christ on earth. I'm Christ's replacement on earth. So he's making himself the head of the body of Christ, when the scriptures tells you we only have one head, right, of the body of Christ, and that's Christ. Christ is our head. All right, now, so let's pick it back up here at verse 37. Back at verse 36. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. All right, that's when it says that shall be determined shall be done. That's talking about at the end of the Great Tribulation. Okay, and this will be ultimately fulfilled, him declaring himself above all gods and the God of gods, when he goes and does the abomination of desolation in Jerusalem, and then he sits in Jerusalem on the throne instead of sitting in the Vatican on the throne, right? That's going to be when he's finally conquered, in his mind, all gods. He doesn't have to go to South Asia and East Asia with the Hindus and all of that stuff, because they've already the Hindu pagan beliefs is the same thing as the Roman Catholics. The Roman Catholics do all the same pagan stuff they do. Right? Like, for example, on Christmas, Christmas is really Saturnalia, the ancient Roman pagan festival celebrating the pagan god Saturn. Okay? The Hindus have a pagan festival that they do, right, celebrating Saturn every year. Same thing. Okay. All right. The final place for the Pope, right, in this pagan system, right, that goes all the way back to ancient Babylon. Okay. We're just dealing with recyclings of Babylon, and the Roman Empire is the final recycling or repackaging of this Babylonian system and this Babylonian religion, right? Just the final repackaging. Okay. So that's what's going on. That's what's going on here at the end of the Great Tribulation, right? And that's when he's going to finally, in his mind, this last pope, right, who's the false prophet, will be God of gods at that point, because now he's in Jerusalem, and in his mind, he's finally got full authority over the Semitic religion, right? The Abrahamic religion, the one that they, in their mind, that they've never been able to conquer. Okay, it should be a foolish thing in his mind, because this is why we have the story of Hanukkah and Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And it being talked about in the Bible, like as we've been covering here in the book of Daniel, because that's a prototype, right, for and a foreshadowing to this. So the same thing that happened to Antiochus Epiphanes is the same thing that's going to end up happening to the beast and the false prophet. They're going to get destroyed. Okay. Just like what happened with Antiochus and Epiphanes during the time of the Maccabees. Okay. But this time is going to be lasting. Right. But the Pope is going to think in his mind, when the abomination of desolation is done, and that starts the great tribulation for 3.5 years, he's going to think in his mind he's finally done it. Right. Now his kingdom can be in Jerusalem, where he thinks it should have been all along in the first place. All right, now, I digress, but I don't digress. Let's pick it back up here at verse 37. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. Notice, this man is not going to have a desire for women, right? So the Pope doesn't have a wife, right? What does the Pope desire, and what does his priest desire? They desire boys, right? They like little boys, okay? They carry on that practice of pedestry, right? So he doesn't want women. He wants to molest little boys, right? Most of them are pedophiles, okay? So no regard, he has no desire of women, right? And no regard for any God, right? Why would he have any regard for any God? He's placed himself above Christ. He's given himself a title above Christ, right? So if he's given himself a title above Christ, he's made himself the Most High. That's why when anybody who visits him, what do they all do? They bow down and kiss the ring, right? Now, so it says here, notice again, so we don't have to guess who this person is. They have no desire of women. And then in the book of Revelation, it tells you the number of this man is 666. When you add up 666 in Roman numerals, right, for various titles for the Pope, they add up to 666, right? When you do them in Roman numerals and when you do them in Greek numerals. Like when you do Vicarious Filii Dei, right, or Vicar of Christ, right? You add that up, it goes up to 666. You add up Deus Clare, right, head of the church. It adds up to 666. You add up in Greek numerals Latino, right, which is in Greek numerals, for a Roman man, right? It adds up to 666. Okay. All right, now let's pick it back up here at verse 38. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Isn't the Vatican filled with all kinds of gold and silver, precious stones? Even when they do their Eucharist, right? They have a golden cup with precious stones, and their garments are, purple and scarlet, and the finest of garments. Okay. How did they acquire all those things? Because they serve a God of forces, right? These forces are talking about war, military, right? But he's serving Satan, right? The God of the forces of this world, right? The God of the kingdoms of this world, okay? And over all of the nations, because Satan's the chief demon over all the other principalities that are over the demonic principalities that are over all of the other nations except for Israel. The children of Israel have Michael, right, as their fighting and warring angel, their prince, right? So their principality is Michael. We're going to read that in just a moment, okay? That's the archangel who fights on their behalf, right? And that's their principality. And then we have Gabriel to lead and guide us, right? The angel of his presence. Now, so this man, right, worships Satan, and he's acquired all of his stuff via war and conquering, right? The Vatican, the Romans are the ones, they took all of this stuff from the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Where do you think most of that stuff is? right? Who has that? The Vatican. And everywhere that the Roman Empire has gone, so this means this isn't rocket science. Everywhere Europeans have gone and colonized, whether it was their first wave of colonizations that started around New Testament times, right? And went all the way up until the like 500s and 600s AD, okay? So these are parts of Northern Africa, basically all of Northern Africa. Excuse me. Even going down into some parts of the coastal horn of Africa with the Red Sea, right? The parts of the Arabian Peninsula, all of the Middle East, Central Asia, Asia Minor, portions of South Asia, right? This is the first wave. This is the first wave of colonizations. Then the second wave of colonizations that started in the 1400s after they revived themselves from the deadly wound and came out of the Dark Ages, right? And they went to all of Africa, all of Asia, all of the Americas, colonizing. What did they do in both times? Okay, that in both times, right? Any civilization or kingdom they encountered, they pillaged that civilization and kingdom, destroyed it, and took their, and when I'm saying encountered, when they finally decided to colonize a place, they destroyed a kingdom, destroyed a civilization, and they either destroy all of the records of that kingdom, or they take all the records back, right, to Europe. And where do most of those records get taken back to? Rome and the Vatican. And where do their holy religious, items and relics and stuff get taken back to? Rome and the Vatican. And when they're not there at Rome and the Vatican, where are they? At display and temporarily at a museum in Paris, or a museum in London, or a museum in Brussels, right? All right. So anyways, that's what this is talking about. And that's how they acquired them, because when those European countries were going and colonizing, they were always doing it on behalf of the Roman religious authorities, right? Even in with the start of the 1400s, it was the Pope who gave the European countries the authority to go and colonize the world. And it was the Pope who divvied up the land amongst them, told them who can have what. All right, now let's pick it back up here at verse 39. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds, right? Again, talking about war. With a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. This is what I was just talking to you about. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him, like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. This is talking about the great tribulation. And when the kings of the east, right, BRICS, when you're going to have, that's going to be the kings of the north alliance. So Iran, Persia, Russia, China, North Korea, all right. The kings of the south, that's going to be the other nations in BRICS that are aligned with them, right? So like South Africa, Saudi Arabia is in BRICS as well. All right, now let's pick it back up here at and remember, America may or may not be with the West in this. In World War II, we were aligned. Britain is not in the European Union, so who knows what Britain does. And America was not in World War II. America was allied with Russia, right? It was Russia, Britain, and America against who? The Roman Empire, aligned with Japan. The Roman Empire being who, right? Fascist Mussolini in Italy, right? Who was co-signed and allowed to have power by the Pope. And then they were aligned and had the blessing of the Pope with the Nazis, right? Germany, okay? all part of what was then, and you put those two together in the areas that they conquered, they were restoring the ancient Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. This is just extra learning on your way to learning. So anyways, I digress, but I don't digress. This is talking about during the Great Tribulation. All right. But nonetheless, even during this time, the papacy is going to set himself up in Jerusalem, which is, in the time we're talking about, is during the Great Tribulation, and is going to be to his detriment, because in the end, talking about at the end of the Great Tribulation, that's going to be one of the reasons that cause all the nations of the world to send their armies, right, to attempt to try to go to Jerusalem, but they're going to end up fighting in the Valley of Jezreel, right, at the Battle of Armageddon, so near where Tel Megiddo is, right? That's going to be one of the reasons they're all drawn to Israel for the Battle of Armageddon. All right, let's pick it back up here at verse 41. He shall enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, right? Even Edom, right, and Moab, right, and the chief of the children of Ammon. This is Moab and Ammon is talking about Jordan. The modern day capital of Jordan is talking about the ancient area of where the Moabites and the Ammonites live. The people living in Jordan today primarily do not descend from those ancient Moabites and Ammonites. They descend from Arabs, right? Primarily from Ishmaelites and Midianites. So people related to them and people that were still in that general vicinity in ancient times. But most of the actual Moabites and Ammonites, after the time of the Gentiles started, when the Chaldeans took over in the area from the Assyrians, becoming the dominant world power, after taking over from the Assyrians, most of the Moabites and Ammonites migrated to northern Africa and western Africa and central Africa. All right, now, and also with the Moors later into the Iberian Peninsula, because some of they were a part of the Moors as well. Because again, talking about them Punic peoples, all different types of Hebrews were a part of the Punic peoples. All right, again, just learning on your way to learning. All right, but this is talking about during the Great Tribulation, the country of Jordan. Right now, the country of Jordan is at peace with the Vatican, and it's at peace with Israel, and it's Jordan and the kingdom and their dynasty. There starts with an H2, right? Jordan dynasty. Let me get them. Yeah, the Hashemites. The Hashemites. All right, the Hashemites dynasty in Jordan is at peace and in alliance with Israel, right? The Israeli state, and with the Vatican. And so they're the ones who administer the Islamic holy sites that are throughout Israel and Palestine. Jordan is the one who administers those for the Muslims, right? And they're in alliance with the Vatican as well, because there's Catholic sites that people and Greek Orthodox are Greek, because the Greek Orthodox, their official name is the Orthodox Catholics. So the Orthodox Catholic religion, that's the Greek version, and the Roman Catholics, so Greco-Roman Catholics, have holy sites that are in areas Jordan administers, and so they allow them to come. So they're not going to touch Jordan. And the Edomites here, they're in alliance with the Ashkenazis in Israel. It's the Ashkenazis who have most of the power, though. But the Sephardics, they have a little bit. The people who have no power are the Ethiopian ones, the Yemeni and the Malabar. And they have some, but not a lot. They don't have any real decision making. They don't have any real decision making power. There's only a few of them in Knesset, and then a few of them that are military leaders. The predominant decision making is done by the Ashkenazis and Ashkenazi Sephardic mixture. So the Sephardic and the Mizrahi ones, those are the primarily those Edomite converts. The actual bloodline Jews, bloodline Israelites from Jacob, Those are your Ethiopian ones, your African Hebrew Israelites. So your Beta Israel, your African Hebrew Israelites, your Malabar Jews, your Malagasy Jews, your Bantu ones, etc. Right? So those ones are the actual bloodline ones. And in the country of Israel now, you do have about 5% that come from like the Malabar Jews, the Ethiopian or Beta Israel, African Hebrew Israelites, and with the African Hebrew Israelites, a lot of them, because they're from the ones here in the diaspora from the New World, so they have Bantu ancestry. So you have Bantu Jews there, and you have some Malagasy amongst the Malabar. They make up about 5% of Israel's population, but they don't have any real decision-making power, right? So the decision-making power to make the temple, right, and then when they come and stop the sacrifices, to stop that is going to be in the hands of the Edomites and the Ashkenazis. This also plays into the fact of why it talks about there being some actual real Jews in Jerusalem at the time of the end of the Great Tribulation. And it talks about, it's prophesied how there will be like a tenth of the city that's saved, right? That's talking about those actual Jews that are there, right? Anyways, I digress, but I don't digress. Now, let's pick it back up here. And this is why when it says here, Edom will be spared, right? Edom is going to end up being spared because they're the ones, again, in conjunction, right, with the Gentile converts. So you have the Sephardic and the Ashkenazis. When the European Union has them stop doing the sacrifices, they're going to go along with it, right? There's a lot of secular Ashkenazi, a lot of secular Sephardic, and they're not going to like the idea of killing, thousands and thousands of animals all the time. It's going to be it's going to be viewed and looked at as a barbaric practice, right? So there's going to be people in the leadership who's going to go along with it being done. So they're going to end up being spared. All right, now, verse 42. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble, right? So notice he's going to be able to they're going to be able to take over Egypt during the Great Tribulation, right? But the rest of Africa, they're not going to be able to take over, right? Not going to be able to. In ancient times, Libya referred to all of the Maariv, right? All of West Africa and all of Central Africa. That was Libya in the ancient world. And Ethiopia was all the rest of Africa. Okay? All right. Why is it they're not going to be able to get there and they're going to be at their steps? All right. Reason being that it tells you in Zephaniah chapter 3, that's where the majority of the real Israelites are going to be, the real actual ethnic Jews, like that real ethnic Jews, the real ethnic Israelites. The ones, a lot of the ones who are going to be gathered in the second Exodus, right, of the flesh and blood ones who don't end up making the first resurrection. Okay, a lot of them, and that's why that area during the Great Tribulation, other than the wilderness, is going to have the least amount of damage and destruction. It's still going to happen there, but it's going to be lesser than in other parts of the world because it tells you, right, in the book of Zechariah and the book of Revelation, right, and even here in Daniel, the focus during the Great Tribulation for the punishment is going to be on the Gentiles, okay? The Gentiles, those are the Japhetic peoples. Japhetic peoples are your Indo-Europeans, okay? So it's going to be in places, the punishments are going to be primarily in places where Indo-European peoples are the majority, right? And where Indo-European people's way of life is the custom, Okay? Now, let's pick it back up here at verse 44. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. What tidings? When that sixth trumpet blows. When that sixth trumpet blows, the river Euphrates is going to dry up. And when the river Euphrates dries up, that book is going to be revealed, but that's a lesson for another day. And then after it dries up, the kings of the east are going to make their way for the Battle of Armageddon, which is going to happen after the seventh trumpet blows. Okay? And when they're making that army making its march, that's these troublings out, these tithings out of the east that's going to trouble him. All right? It tells you in the book of Revelation that that's going to be an army of 200 million soldiers. All right? But tithings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore, he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. All right. What tabernacle is this talking about? He's going to place his tabernacle, right? Meaning no longer is the papacy going to be in the Vatican, but during this 3.5 year period, the papacy is going to place his palace in Jerusalem. All right. But notice what it says here. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. All right. It tells us in the book of Revelation, his end is going to come when him and the beast, the false prophet and the beast, are tossed into the lake of fire alive. All right. Now, let's go to Revelation chapter 11. Let me see. We're going back to Daniel 12 yet. No, we'll get to it later. All right. Now, let's go here to Revelation 11, and just making sure where I want to stop for today. Right now, I want to read these. All right, we'll stop here, and then this is where we'll pick it back up tomorrow night. All right, so this is Revelation 11, verses 1 through 2. Revelation 11, verses 1 through 2. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. So 42 months, that's 3.5 years. Okay. So I have here in the notes, if John was a disciple of Christ, he did not write this after 70 AD, right? The temple had not been destroyed yet. 42. So he's seeing the temple, right? At the time, it hadn't been destroyed yet, right? And the angel is telling them to measure, to leave without the outer court, because that's where the Gentiles are going to trample underfoot, right? For 42 months, that's 3.5 years, all right? This temple will be built before the Great Tribulation, okay? And this is where they're going to do the abomination of desolation, all right? The Gentiles here equals the European Union and the Vatican, which will eventually take it over at the start of the tribulation. This temple will be built next to the original spot where the Dome of the Rock Mosque is now. And we already talked about this. Just like the Israelites, the Arabs are Hebrews. They descend from Abraham. So that wouldn't be where the Dome of the Rock is. That wouldn't be where Gentiles are in control of. Because as long as the Dome of the Rock is there with the Arabs controlling it, that's still a descendant of Abraham. That wouldn't be the Gentiles. So that's why if you pay attention to the news coming out of Israel, right out of Jerusalem, they're now talking about building the temple somewhere adjacent to a couple hundred yards away from the Dome of the Rock. And now they're claiming that's where the real Temple Mount was. And that's not actually the real location, but all of this was actually prophesied in the book of Daniel. All right. And the ones who do the higher up clerics, in Israel, even like the Rebbe and all that. The higher up ones, they know this too. It's all part of the master plan. Like what I'm saying, they know, like they all know this is all about getting HaMashiach here, by hook or by crook. The violent gonna take it the kingdom by force, right? So, anyways, so now we will focus on what Hanukkah, Antiochus Epiphanes, and the Maccabees are a foreshadowing of, right? The Maccabees, and that's what we'll start dealing with tomorrow. The Maccabees was a foreshadowing of the restoration of the Israelite kingdom and the conquering and assimilation of Edomites living in the promised land. At the second advent, Antiochus Epiphanes is a foreshadowing of the beast and false prophet, right? While the dedication of Ezekiel's temple and Christ's kingdom after his second advent will take place on Hanukkah as well, right? So, and I have here, happy Hanukkah. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and doing of his word. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. And at HaMashiach's second advent, there's going to be, it tells you in the Tanakh, is prophesied, there's going to be a remnant of the Edomites, right? So the same thing is going to happen again. And it tells you those Edomites, that remnant of Edomites are just going to get grafted into the children of Israel. That's why it tells you that in the Torah, in the book of Deuteronomy, them and the Egyptians. So them and the Nilotic peoples are the only ones who can get grafted in like that, actually physically, and become actual ethnic Israel. So if you want that in literal terms, your Sephardic, your Mizrahi, your and then your like Edo people in West Africa, your Idoma and so forth, related type peoples. And then your for the Egyptians, your Nilotic peoples. All right. Shalom Aleichem, Shabbat Shalom, and happy Hanukkah, everybody.